So we're good. So thank you, George, for taking this time just to chat with me a little bit, just about what's going on in your world. Would you be willing to share with me just what's it been like to be an anchor, to be a news reporter during this time, the last couple of weeks, certainly with all the things happening in Madison and around the world, as well as over the last 3 months with COVID. Would you be willing to reflect a little bit? What's it been like for you?
You know, it's interesting. I think anybody who gets into this business, when these types of moments happen, when these types of stories happen, this is what we do. So you want to be involved in some way in covering the big story. So when the protest, the original Saturday began, I was it's my off day, and I was getting notes from the office, hey, can you come in if we need you? And I said, sure. And then by the end of, the afternoon, when looting and stuff was happening, they said, yeah, we need you in. So initially they asked me to come in and anchor with Jen Cleasy, who does our Saturday and Sunday shows. But I said, no, let me go downtown because I wanted to be down there in the thick of it to report and, kind of field anchor our program. And so, I went down there late afternoon, 6 o'clock maybe, and I was down there for about 6 hours.
Wow.
And it was a very intense atmosphere. Lots of people in the streets, lots of chaos. The police in their riot gear, occasionally the pepper spray or tear gas, whatever they were using, would pop out. And I didn't take any direct hits, but there were a couple of times where I was close enough that my eyes and throat would burn. There were a couple times when I was, you're trying to get as close to the crowd as possible without endangering yourself. And all of a sudden, maybe a glass would break. And then this huge crowd would start rushing at us and we're turning around to run. So we get out of the way and don't get trampled. And so I joked that I was able to, I can sprint still short distances without pulling a muscle. So yeah. I learned that being down there over the weekend. But I mean, it was a sad night. I was by the Museum of Contemporary Art in that block where the Orpheum Theater is, and people were breaking windows. They were breaking into a gift shop. People were spray painting, blank the police. So it was pretty intense, and I can't recall any story that I've covered as intense as that one. It's possible I have, and it's not coming to mind, but this was a unique story.
Wow. Yeah, I bet it was very unique, and you'll always remember it, the intensity, what it represented, what was happening in our own city, and representative of what was happening around the country at that point. And then it certainly after that spread around the world. I remember watching you that night on the street and feeling for you and just imagining kind of the adrenaline that must have been running through your body and the fear and stress, and just trying to do a professional job that you did do as a reporter on the street, but also just feeling the personal nature of that as well. So I know there was one recent incident that you reported on social media, just about you were unfairly treated and challenged, about you were trying to recharge your equipment. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened, what that encounter was like?
So my cell phone died, and I need my cell phone in order to connect with the station and hear the show. So I was by the U.S. courthouse downtown behind the Overture Center, and I plugged in my phone in an outlet outside of the building. And inside the building, a light clicks on, and a security guard said, you need to unplug your phone. Why? You need to unplug your phone. I said, I don't understand why. And he said, well, I'm going to call the police. And I said, go ahead and call the police. I think they're a little busy now, but go ahead and call them. And then a few minutes later, the security guard came outside, and I told the camera guy I was with, roll on all of this if he comes out. And sure enough, he demanded to know my name, who I was. We're standing there with a camera and microphone. And, he said to me, he said, what's your name? I said, I don't tell you my name. And so, not that I was afraid to, but I don't have to identify myself. I haven't committed a crime. And I'll get back to that. And then, he said, we've had a problem here with homeless people, using the outlet. And I said, do I look homeless to you? I was wearing a suit, no tie, and, clearly working for the media. And so it's a public space. I mean, there are outlets all over downtown outside. And, I've looked up the law on this. I've talked to lawyers, and this is not the first time something like this has happened to me. So the law is clear. I can be in front of a police station. I can be in front of a business. The sidewalk in front of buildings it's public. It is not private. It's a public area. And, just for background, police often demand to see identification from young Black men or from Black men in general. That is something that has happened time and time again over the years. And if you're not committing a crime, you're not under any legal obligation to do that. So, I mean, this guy was a security guard. He wasn't even a police officer, and he's trying to tell me I need some ID. I don't need any ID. And what triggered me was my experiences with police. In 1988, I was a grad student at Columbia Journalism School. In the building with my books, and a white police officer came over to me and demanded to see my ID. Now, I'm a student there, in the building,
Right.
paying full tuition, I might add, and he demands, why? What for? I flash forward to, in the 2000s when I was a reporter at ESPN. I was staying at the Sheraton in Chicago, and I was in the lobby. It was New Year's Eve. A Chicago cop says, hey, I've been watching you and you're lurking. You're lurking. And I said, lurking? I'm a guest at the hotel. And he demands to see my ID. I said, I don't have to show you my ID. So I said, you walk with me. And we walked over to the front desk, and I showed the clerk my ID. And I said, tell him I have a room here. And she did. And I said, I'm a guest at the hotel. And I walked away. And so that was the end of that. And my third encounter, and it wasn't really an ID, but it's an encounter that I've related on social media. I was in New Orleans in 2012, staying at the Ritz-Carlton, very fancy hotel, attending the National Association of Black Journalists. And I was walking to a bar not far from the hotel, and I can't remember the exact circumstances, but there was a woman who was also staying at the hotel, and we may have run into each other a block away from this bar, and we both ended up going to the same bar. She was going to meet some friends or whatever it was. So we walked in at the same time. We're having just, light conversation. We both got a beer or whatever. And, we continued to chat just for a minute. And then I guess she was going to go off and see her friends. And this white police officer happened to be in the bar. And his first comment when he saw the two of us was, is he bothering you? And I wasn't bothering anybody. It was our first drink. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't harassing her. We were just having light conversation. And that quickly escalated to, do you want to spend the night in jail?
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, that'd be a good story. And I decided it was best just to walk away. And in 2004 or 5, I can't remember the year, might have been a little later, after Katrina, there was a shooting incident involving police murdering people on the Danziger Bridge shootings in New Orleans. And so that's on my mind as I'm in this bar with this cop, white cop. And I just said, it's just not worth it. I'd rather be able to live and tell the story than have something unforeseen happen. So I walked out.
Wow.
So those kinds of things were on my mind when the security guard demands to see my ID. And by the way, he could have just left me alone. I was just plugging in my phone. I wasn't trying to break in the building.
Sure.
And from my point of view, if my co-anchor Amber Noggle had been plugging her phone in, I wonder if she would have gotten the same treatment. Yeah. And I've had other reporters tell me, hey, I plug in my phones all the time at all these, and no one's ever bothered me. So it rubbed me the wrong way. Sure. And I let him know I wasn't happy.
Yeah. I don't blame you for reacting like that, George. It's very unfortunate, very wrong, and very troubling. The multiple experiences that you've had for no good reason, for those things to have been done to you and questioned about you, and the suspicion and the
Mm-hmm.
accusations, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, it marks a person, sure.
Yeah, I mean, these things stay with you. And, just as a one broader comment, all of my Black friends, just about all of them, Ivy League educated, lawyers, doctors, bankers, have a horror story involving being stopped by police in some way, shape, or form, whether it's stop and frisk, handcuffed in the back of a car, traffic stop at gunpoint. I mean, time after time after time. And it's almost a joke within our community, driving while Black, charging your phone while Black, shopping while Black. And you laugh to keep from crying.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. It's crazy. That's crazy. So what would you say to me, George? I'm a pastor. I'm your pastor. What would you say to me as your pastor? What difference can I make? How can I lean into this time as a pastor, and how can we as a church lean in, make a difference, have a voice, take some steps to make progress around just the discrimination, the violence, the injustice when it comes to race, and especially when it comes to Black people today and Black men, as you're pointing out.
I was on a radio show this week, Wilde and Tausch, Sports Talk Radio, and they asked me the same question. And I said that I thought, first of all, not being afraid to address the issue, to just talk about the issue was one important thing. And they had a number of guests on throughout the week, mostly Black men, but a variety of guests talking about the issue. So I think talking about the issue is one. I think for everyone, talking about it in a civil way. We had an incident, and you may have seen this with Drew Brees, who spoke up about his beliefs about the flag, and it caused an uproar, and then people start calling him names, and you're not going to be able to really have an honest dialogue if it immediately goes there. And I know Drew Brees. I've covered Drew Brees when I was at ESPN. He's religious. He's conservative. He has done tons of charity work in New Orleans for many different communities. And so I know his background, and I think he's done a lot of good. And so something good will come of that, the furor died down. But you can't be afraid to have the dialogue. If you can't have the dialogue, you're not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get any better. And then I think the other thing, well, the two things. One is that people should listen to what Black people are saying, because I'm in my 50s. This has been happening my entire life. My father was a freedom rider, arrested in the early 60s for breaching the peace when he was trying to integrate in Alabama. So in the 60s, he was doing these things, and we're still working on a lot of them now. Obviously, we've made a lot of progress. I don't have to drink out of a colored water fountain. I can go stay at nice hotels. But then again, I'm in a nice hotel and I'm being accused of lurking by a police officer. And I guess the final thing is, it seems like this is a moment. It seems like this is a moment that we might finally see some real change. And I hope that it is. I'm frankly not all that optimistic.
Okay.
I'm sorry to say that, but 50 years for me.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will be a moment to see crowds of all races together, all around the country, all around the world, protesting police brutality and what happened to George Floyd. So I hope that this moment turns into true change.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's well stated, George, well stated. How about for your family? How are your kids doing? And obviously you have young kids, so how much do you talk to them about what's going on? How much do you share with them? How are they doing? What concerns and fears do you have as their dad?
Mm-hmm. I think we have pretty constructive conversations with them. I mean, for instance, they watched when I was downtown
Okay.
that initial Saturday night, and they know, it's hard to turn on the news and not see some of these things. So they are familiar in a broad way that there are things going on. Frankly, my wife is better talking about these issues than I am. She'll say, well, sometimes people are discriminated against. I've actually let her take the lead on this, but there'll be a certain point, a certain age where, all Black people have the talk. Now, my family's biracial, but you have the talk with your children about how to deal with police. And so I'll do that at some point. A quick aside, I've been pulled over 20 plus times by police, and I have a routine. Interior lights on, my keys are on the dashboard. I usually keep my driver's license in my breast pocket or out so that I don't have to reach. No sudden movements. Windows already down when the officer gets there. So you want to do everything you can to not appear threatening. And so, that's a talk that Black people have with their kids all over the place. Wow. And let me just interject one last thing, Harold. There's, I think that sometimes people don't see how Black people are treated by police. And so the George Floyd incident was on video. Think about the incidents that aren't on video. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he's got his knee on the neck, and not one of those other officers did a thing. They just watched. I mean, how callous. Yeah. And if you go back and look at history, in the 60s, the police were spraying hoses and sicking dogs on protesters, beating people mercilessly. So yes, things have changed, but that's not a long period of time to totally evolve. And, whether it's Eric Garner or George Floyd, Laquan McDonald in Chicago, I mean, people can look these cases up and see what's involved and how it happens time after time after time. And, particularly what really stands out about the George Floyd, I mean, they treated him like an animal. Yeah. And then after, the statement that the Minneapolis police initially put out said nothing about what we saw on video. It was a traffic stop. He resisted arrest, and huh? Wow. Is that what you saw? I mean, there's video of it, and yet they put that out there. So there's absolutely no transparency. And so police routinely in these big incidents filed false reports. In the Laquan McDonald case in Chicago in 2014, officers, and there's an officer in prison for shooting him 16 times. The other officers at the scene lied. They filed false police reports, and some were disciplined. They lied about what happened, and it was on video. Wow. So even with video, and George Floyd, let's see if the officer's convicted. He might not be. No, wow. That's going to be a whole nother set of issues, because it's frankly not common for police officers to be convicted of these fatal shootings on duty. That the percentage is low. Wow.
That is crazy, George. Yeah, and a lot of us, I'm learning, I'm growing in my understanding. A lot of us are just unaware. We don't see it until an incident like this, and there have been others that we've seen over the last few years, the last decade. But it's not always that obvious. The cases that we don't see, the hundreds and thousands of incidences. Yeah. Oh boy, gives you a heavy heart. Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, George, for your time, sharing your heart, some of your own story, and certainly your challenge to me, to the church, to the community, to all of us, to step in, to make a difference, to seek change, to have a voice, and to create a better world, beginning right here at home in Madison, in your own community. Yeah, thank you,
My
George.
pleasure.
Thank you. God bless you. God bless you.
We'll see you soon.